Welcome back to the Modern Athlete Podcast. I'm super pumped for today's episode. I have George Greene. George is one of my closest friends in the industry. He's always been a guy that I could reach out to for advice, whether it was career-wise, life-wise, strength and conditioning, anything and everything. He's one of my first calls. So I'm super pumped to have him on. George is currently the Director of High Performance and Head Football Sports Performance Coach at University of Massachusetts. George and I became close when he was the Senior Associate Director of Athletics for High Performance and Competitive Success. So if you're not familiar with New York, I was at Hofstra University, which is on Long Island in Nassau County, and then George was at Stony Brook in Suffolk County. So we were probably, George, like 50 miles apart, not even, something like that.
50 miles in 5 hours, depending on traffic. But yeah.
Exactly, with New York traffic. Exactly. Yeah. So, but I'm super pumped to have you on, man. I really appreciate you taking the time, especially in season. I know it's tough as a football strength and conditioning coach to make it happen. So yeah, I appreciate it, brother. So George, real quick. So I know I told the last two spots of where you're at, but just kind of walk us through what made you become a strength and conditioning coach? How did you get bit by that bug, and how did you make it a career, and why?
Yeah. So, and I appreciate you, Coach, and I appreciate you having me on. And the feeling is 100% mutual. I appreciate you. So my career, I always loved training. Undersized, probably a similar story to a lot of people. Undersized athlete, super competitive. Started lifting weights when I was in 8th grade and really became addicted to it. My uncle was into training. My dad played sports. But for me, it was, I wanted to give myself an edge. So I started working out really with no rhyme or reason in high school. Ended up going to Springfield College. And within a few days there, we were exposed to their strength and conditioning program with two really good strength and conditioning coaches, Mike Kamal and Mary Kate Fight. And honestly, saw what they did for a living and realized that was an avenue I could potentially go down. Started to just do a little research and went in there thinking I'd be a PE major, maybe coach football and a high school coach or something like that, and fell in love with the strength and conditioning and started pursuing that as a career path really my freshman year of college. Graduated from Springfield, went to the University of Iowa to do an internship. From Iowa, I actually came here to UMass. This is actually my 3rd time here. Was at UMass here as a paid intern, left, worked in the private sector in New York for about a year, came back to UMass to my first full-time job. I was here 3 years. And then I had the opportunity to work in the tactical space down at Fort Bragg as a strength and conditioning coach, serving the Special Forces. Left there to become a Division III director, spent 2 years at the University of Mary Washington, then 9 at Stony Brook. And now I'm in my first year here at UMass in my role, working with the head football coach here in Joe Harasimiak, who I've known for over 20 years and really trying to build something from the ground up here. So in my 18th year as a strength coach, I fall in love with it all over again every year. So super fortunate to do what I do.
That's awesome, man. And similar story to a lot of strength coaches out there, like as far as getting your everything you need certification-wise, degrees, and then having to bounce around a little bit. But then you have longevity, obviously, at Stony Brook for a while and been in the field for 18 plus years. So being in the field 18 years, when we both got into strength and conditioning, it was strength and conditioning. It seems like, what would you say, maybe the past 5 to 10 years maybe, that it really changed into more what they call sports performance and high performance. What would you say is like the difference between like the old school, just strength and conditioning versus like what high performance means for teams, individuals, things like that?
Yeah. So I think when you look at what high performance is compared to strength and conditioning, high performance is like all of those aspects that impact an athlete, whether you're a tactical athlete or a collegiate professional, whatever the case might be. Right. So it's all the other things that influence those things. Right. So you have your technical, your tactical, that's what you're doing. If you're an athlete, that's on the field. If you're serving the military or in the tactical setting, right, that's your training. That's all those things. The physical and the mental side are the other aspects that go into that. Physical is what you think of in terms of strength and conditioning. And then the mental, you've seen this a lot now, especially I think that field's booming with mental skills and sports psychology integrating into that model. Right. And then you have your recovery, your medical, and it's really looking at the athlete and saying, okay, like, what are the gaps we need to fill? And ultimately, like, who are the people that serve this person? And they working together to ultimately get the athlete to whatever his or her potential is, right? So, that's tying in the medical personnel if it's an injury or they've had a history, right? It's It's nutrition is probably one of the biggest missing elements from all these areas, right? Are you dialed in that area? Are you eating the way you need to eat to be able to get to where you need to be, right? And then the training side, I think that has been tried and true. I think you've seen from a strength and conditioning perspective a lot of like the principles that started, 70s, 80s, and 90s. People are realizing those are actually the foundational principles that need to be applied. You're seeing people get away from some of the gimmicky stuff and coming back to some of the more that what would be classified as old school strength and conditioning methods because they work, right? And then now they're tying in some of these other areas to make sure that the athlete is getting everything they need, which I think is the right way, right? You got to be strong, you got to be robust, you got to be resilient. In order to do that, you got to get under the bar, you got to strain, and on top of that, you got to tie in some of the other things. So for me, it's like, how do you tie all that stuff together? Whatever population I've served, whether it's football players, basketball players, or in the military setting, like you just kind of figuring out what those people need and make sure they get it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think it's important for our audience to hear this too, because again, I don't like the term tactical athlete, but our population is majority tactical professionals, whether it's military, fire, police, first responder. And sometimes people think that strength and conditioning is the only answer for performance, but you touched on a lot more than just strength and conditioning, obviously. So for people out there that may not be aware of like what high performance looks like, what are your resources as far as for the football team, like as far as what falls under that high performance umbrella?
Right. So for us, and I think you see it at a lot of places, like it's resources, it's people, right? It's all of those things, and it's tying all those things together. So like in our facility, we have a beautiful weight room that has everything you would ever need in a Division I strength and conditioning facility, right? We're outfitted with 13 double-sided racks. We have all the bells and whistles that you need from a training standpoint. In our facility, we also have a fueling station with supplements, with protein, with meal replacements, with things like that for our players. In conjunction with the nutrition side, we obviously feed them, we do training table and things like that. We have an educational component that goes along with that, right? So you have the physical training and you have the recovery as it relates to nutrition. If I open my weight room door and walk down my office and open the next door in front of me, which is about 10 feet outside, we have our athletic training room. They're right on top of each other. The guys have to walk through the training room to get to the weight room from the locker room. We have cold tubs. We have hot tubs. We have every recovery modality. We have 3 full-time strength and conditioning coaches and 4 full-time athletic trainers who serve our team. So there's collaboration on guys coming back from injury. There's return to play protocols. There's, a cohesive understanding of like, okay, this athlete is healthy. This athlete is injured. This athlete is in the middle. Where do we need to get these people and make sure they're moving in the right direction? From a technology standpoint, we have Catapult GPS devices we wear every day at practice. We use a NordBoard for posterior chain strength and asymmetries, and we use a force plate in conjunction with, some readiness assessment tools, just like RPE, things like that, to be able to figure out, okay, how are athletes performing every day? What do we need to do to make sure we're adjusting things at practice? And so you kind of tie all of those things together. There's mental health resources on campus, both from a sports psychology standpoint and from a clinical standpoint. So it's, how do you continue to evolve and build those things over time, make sure they work together? But, those are the resources from a Division I FBS standpoint that our athletes have access to.
And no, that's awesome. And that's what should be like your athletes, their bodies matter. So anybody who relies on their body for their job, I think should think about high performance rather than just strength and conditioning. It's all encompassing, and not to say that people that are listening to this podcast are going to have all of those resources, but just understand that there's other aspects like I'm sure you guys like we've been in strength conditioning forever now. Like you get 50 athletes on the same program, if you could possibly get 50 different results because of the nutrition piece, the sleep piece, all of those things. So like that's really important. So I'm glad you touched on that. And this is the other thing that we get a lot of times is individualization. So you're working with how many on your roster right now?
105.
105. And I know this, but it's good for the audience to hear. You're not writing 105 different programs.
Correct.
How many programs would you say you're writing for the football team?
So I would, right now in our in-season program, right, we have your developmental guys. So those are guys that don't play for us on what would be Saturdays, or when Maction right now it's Tuesday or Wednesday, but Those are our guys that are developing, right? So they're on what would be your traditional off-season, right, developmental program. We also have our travel squad. Within our travel squad, right, we have guys that are maybe banged up, injured, things like that. But we have kind of a general team card that all of those guys are following, right? That with the general understanding that this guy is getting ready to play a game every Saturday, and our job is to make sure they're recovered and ready to do that and as healthy as possible. So I'd say really you have two main cards, and then the biggest modifications come from their injury history and any ongoing ailments or things like that that just come up in the game of football. But it's the same with any sport. Like if you go down the line, like football's most of the issues you deal with are contact related, guys just banged up and injured, right? But if you work with a sport like basketball, you might be dealing with ankles. In the tactical population, you might be dealing with someone with low back pain or shoulder issues and things like that, or whatever they're dealing with. So it's kind of like, you know, you might have your buckets, right? We have in our A block, it might be a squat pattern, but that pattern may be different for a person with an injury or an issue. But the training program is essentially the same, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So you have this, so one program for developmental, then you have one program for basically, again, essentially the guys who are playing every day, every
Correct.
week.
Yep.
And did you say there was a third program in there?
And that would just be like anybody who's long-term modified, out, injured, that type of thing.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
for those listening, I assume some of those things are, if you can't back squat because of a low back injury, maybe you're still doing a squat with the team, but that may be a pitch shark, that may be
Correct.
a pendulum leg press or something like that.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and I'm sure for the upper body, for those of you guys listening, if you have an upper extremity injury and let's say you can't bench press, maybe you're still doing that same lift with the team, but it's just modified, whether I'm sure it's probably like dumbbell pressing or neutral grip bar, like football bar, bench pressing, stuff like that. Is that typically what that's like?
Exactly that. And then like
Okay,
our
cool.
our quarterbacks will do that naturally, right? Our horizontal press pattern for the team might be chain bench, but those guys are doing chain neutral football bar or dumbbell bench.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so for a team of just over 100, you're really only writing 3 programs, but you can make adjustments per exercise. But the card essentially looks pretty similar because they're all playing the same sport. Yeah, the positions are obviously different, and I'm sure that dictates your program design and things like that. But I think it's important for everybody to hear that, like, not everything has to be so individualized. Individualization matters, but it doesn't always have to be like a whole different program for every single person. So I think a lot of people sometimes feel like, well, I'm different than this other guy, so I need a completely new program. Well, if you're playing the same sport, it's probably going to look pretty similar with slight modifications and things like that. So,
Absolutely.
okay,
Absolutely
cool.
right.
And what in season, how many days a week are you guys lifting right now?
So right now we go with our travel squad. They lift. We do like a recovery slash like upper body or auxiliary lift with a little bit of posterior chain the day after the game. Just feel like having them do something in the weight room, and they walk out. Essentially, our goal is they walk in and then they leave feeling better than when they got there. Right. So it's really just kind of, especially when we travel and things like that, these guys are banged up. Then we're off, which would be in a 7-day week. We'd be off on Monday. On Tuesday, we practice and then we hit lower body. On Wednesday, we practice and we hit upper body. On Thursday, it's a no sweat day for us, the way we structure our practice. So we don't lift at all on Thursday. And then on Friday, we do like a fast Friday. So our practice is super short, intense. And we do like a primer session on the front end of that. So like explosive stuff, some plyos, things like that on the front end. So they come into our room 4 days, and I would say our big rocks, our clean squat bench, things like that get done on the Tuesday and Wednesdays, and kind of our auxiliary or more of our power plyo, explosive med ball work and stuff like that gets done between the recovery day on the Sunday and then the fast Friday primer session.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And when you're doing like, so if you have the squat early on in the week, I think you said Tuesday, like, are you doing total body with that lift, or is everything lower body that entire day?
So our Tuesday is a lower, I would say it's more of an emphasis. It's a lower body emphasis. So we do pulls, like clean pull, some sort of Olympic variation. We'll squat. We'll do some vertical pulling on that day. And we'll do some single leg work and some core work. Then on Wednesday, it's an upper body emphasis, but we will hit a secondary posterior chain on the back end of that day also. So we do get a little bit in both of those sessions, but the emphasis is lower body on Tuesday, upper body on Wednesday. Tuesday, furthest day out from the game.
Yeah.
You can still get after it a bit.
Yeah.
And then Wednesday, mostly upper body.
Yeah. So still total body in nature. You just have more of an emphasis depending on the day of whatever
Correct.
you're trying to. Gotcha. And as far as, so that's in season. In the off season, how many days a week do you lift versus how many days a week do you condition?
So that's a little bit where we'll get into some of the position specific work, and you'll see things that are a little bit different. So in the winter, big point emphasis in the winter is gaining muscle and getting stronger, right? And so for us, we'll spend 6 weeks just because we have a longer winter break. We only get about 6 weeks, and we'll be on the field running 3 days, and we'll be in the weight room 4, and we'll space that out over that 5-day week. So we'll do 2 days on in the weight rooms. The way we have it structured now, Monday we'll be on the field, we'll hit some acceleration work, we'll come in the weight room, we'll hit upper body. Tuesday will just be a lower body only weight room day. Wednesday will be a field only day, and we'll do some competitive stuff on that day. We'll do some football work, some conditioning. Thursday we'll come back in, hit another field session, and then do upper body. And then Friday will be a weight room only lower body session. Again, similar concept. There will be some upper body. It's the emphasis on those days. There'll be some upper body sprinkled in on the lower body days, but the emphasis is upper lower. And that's when we're getting strong. Like we're getting strong. We're putting muscle mass on these guys. They're coming off of essentially 6 weeks away from us in some capacity while they're home. And then we'll get to spring ball. So the way football works, you go for 6 weeks of training. Spring ball, we'll have 3 practices, 3 lifts. And then we'll get into summer. And summer is where we kind of flip it, especially with our skill, our mids. Like those guys, like we got to prepare them for camp and the season. So we'll go 5 days a week on the field. So we feel like that's really helped in terms of, mitigating some of the soft tissue issues that come up when you really don't get exposed to some of the high speed work and what really they're going to have to do in camp. So we'll be on the field 5 days, and we'll be in the weight room 4. And that's in the winter. And then in the summer, you'll see our big guys, if you look at it, I think Kurt Hester kind of talked about this, like in terms of the percentage of time, right? And this is kind of a simple way to look at it. Your bigs, right? So your interior guys in the trenches, 60% of their time probably should be spent in the weight room with 40% of their time spent on the field. Your mids are 50-50. Your skill's the opposite of the bigs. Probably 60% of their time needs to be on the field, 40% of that time in the weight room, just for the demands of what they do.
Yeah.
Your skill guys need to be lightning fast, strong enough. Big mids need to be somewhere in between. Your big guys need to be, enormous, strong, and short for about 5 yards and explosive for about 5 yards, right? 5 to 10 yards. So that's where you kind of look at, okay, what are the needs, and then let's break this down. But you can still simplify how you do things, and just look at it that way. So.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot, and I like that percentage breakdown too. That makes a lot of sense. And I wanted you to cover all the football side, because people listening are probably like, well, I'm not an athlete per se, and I don't have like these structured in season, off season, things like that. So for you, going from college athletics to then taking that tactical strength and conditioning job, what did that, like, was that a tough transition for you, being that, again, a civilian coming into in the Army world and learning the lingo, the training, and all of that? How was that transition for you?
I love my time working for the military. So I would say the transition wasn't hard at all. It was just like anywhere you go, to me, it was like, all right, how do I just sit back and learn and listen? And it's amazing how when you do that, how much you do soak in and you learn. And it is very different for anybody that's done both, in terms of like there's a very specific training block that you have, right? Like I just identified, you have 6 weeks of winter workouts where you're getting stronger and putting weight on. In the tactical world, like you're making sure they're ready all the time. And like, there's all these buckets you probably need to fill. And I'm speaking to somebody with way more expertise in this than me, but like, you're looking at a person and saying, okay, this person needs to have, it needs to be strong. They need to be durable. They need to have great conditioning levels. There's tests that they need to be able to pass and be prepared to do certain trainings that have all sorts of elements and other aspects that don't happen in college sports, especially indoor ones.
Yeah.
Right. So you really just, you're helping to prepare, like, and I think that's where the high performance approach and model really fits the tactical spaces. You're trying to just arm them to be prepared and ready at all times. And And oftentimes without the resources that they have in a big, beautiful $5 million, weight room on a college campus, these people might be deployed with a set of dumbbells and a pull-up bar. And how do you prepare them for what they need to do? You can, and you really can do that. So I think it almost is, what I loved about it it's you're wearing so many different hats, because you're like, okay, and you can use your a creative brain to be able to execute. I've worked in a lot of different sports, and I've also worked in the private sector in the tactical space. And like, really, at the end of the day, when you really break it down, like, you're helping solve problems as a strength coach. That's all your job really is. Like, here's the problem, I've got to solve it. And then, to me, the best coaches I've ever been around, like yourself, you're adaptable to the cultures that exist within whatever sport or organization you're in. So you kind of get there, you learn, and you listen. Like football, I've worked in basketball and football most of my career in some capacity. They're very different. So it's just understanding, okay, like, all right, you can do both, but you've got to prepare to make the best impact. You've got to adapt to those people, learn who you're serving, right? And you got to be yourself everywhere. But then, like, okay, understand that, like, the intensity required for this population may not fit this one. Or, that's where, like, it's soft skills and it's a little bit more of the psychology side to be able to help. And then in the tactical space, the one sector I haven't been in is professional sports. But I would say, I would liken that to probably like you're kind of partnering with somebody. In college, it's like, okay, we're doing this, right? You want to give those people autonomy and things like that, but there's a more structure. Like within that world, it's like, okay, like, you might be dealing with somebody my age or older, right? Like, and how you help that person is gonna, you're gonna coach and treat that situation differently. I don't know if that makes sense, but the time I was in it, that's what I felt, and I enjoyed that. You're partnering with somebody and you're helping them get prepared and listening to them at a high level.
I like that. I like what you said about like being a strength coach. You're naturally a problem solver. You have
Yeah,
these problem sets that are given to you, and you have to make those decisions to make it work with whatever resources or lack thereof you have access
yeah,
to. So, no,
yeah.
that's a good point. And I actually didn't know this until I started going through your background. You won an excellence award from the command team there.
When I was at Fort Bragg, yeah.
It's awesome, man. Awesome. Not know that. And as far as, did you do a lot of individual program design? Was it more group program design? How was that for you?
When I first got there, it was more individual. It was like, hey, this is a guy that wants to come in, and they kind of were just getting me started. And then it was more group oriented.
Yeah.
Oh, and that was the thing that I think, and I've done a lot of research on the tactical space, and just in terms of like where people may struggle coming from college. And it seems like in college, there's, unless a guy is sick or injured, they're always coming. What I found is, like, earlier, like, okay, I put this great program together, and like, oh shoot, they missed 3 days. What should I do? Right? You like, they had to go to a training. Like, they had, like, that's going to take precedent priority. They may now, okay, like now, so then you're like, then the creative brain starts working. And you're like, okay, we got one. If I know I'm going to have them at least one day, maybe it's Mondays, I'm going to do this, and this, and then I'm going to give them stuff I know they could do on their own. But at least we took care of that. And so I think that's really the biggest difference, is like, you just got to be prepared for, like, there's no linear periodization. It just doesn't exist. But you can stay really strong and unbelievably fit and healthy if you're just consistent. So if you could just get people to be consistent with, like, whatever it is you feel like is important, then I feel like then it carries over well. But that was to me, like, what was kind of cool in that setting. But I remember, like, my first time they were like, okay, we're going to give you a group. I was like all jacked up. Like, I went home that night. I was on my couch, like, banging out like a 4-week block and made cards and all that stuff. And I got there and they were like, oh, yeah, actually, you know what? Those guys aren't going to be here till next week. But and so I'm like, okay, all right, like, let's go then. Like, let me tear this up and adjust and help them in whatever way I can, So, and I actually really like that. Like, that kind of fits me personality wise. Like, I like and a lot of strength coaches, like, I love the off season. I like the changes of the season. That's kind of, I like all of them, truthfully. But the fun part about in season to me is every day is new. Like, every day, there's some, like, I'm going to have to, like, make a on the fly decision that you hope is the right one. Right. So often with, okay, this guy's out. Like, okay, this guy's, like, we got guys right now in Devo who are playing in the game. Okay. Do I keep pushing the envelope here? Do we pull him back? Like, I like the challenge of that
Yeah.
side.
Yeah,
The
definitely.
off season's easy. Like,
Yeah, that's
you know,
and yeah, with the military, fire, police, first responder, like you said, they don't have an off season, so linear periodization doesn't necessarily work because when do you have that uninterrupted block of time? Yeah, there might be some blocks of time where you have some off time and whatever, or just your schedule's not as busy and you can kind of dedicate some effort towards this. But what I've seen is like it's you don't have the luxury of training for like hypertrophy for like 3 to 6 months. Obviously, if you're trying to get big, you have like you mentioned all those buckets that you have to pour into. Well, all right, I need to be strong. I need to have muscle mass. I need to be lean, like body fat wise. I need to be conditioned. There's so many things that you got to train that you have to train them at all times because there's not enough hours, weeks, days in the year to get all of those things accomplished if it's like done block by block. That's where it's completely different from college from that standpoint. So yeah,
no question.
I like how you
Yeah.
on that. And with the tactical side, from a program design standpoint, were you more total body? Obviously, you're doing total body now in college, but were you doing more total body training with them?
I would say it was a little bit more total body oriented because at least I knew, especially if it was a group that was coming in for 2 days or 3 days, it was a little bit more total body oriented. And I honestly, depending on what the goals are, I like having the flexibility of a total body program because I think you get to expose people to patterns more frequently, especially with a group that maybe hasn't done them, right? So if you want to hit a squat, you might have your I learned a lot from you about the tier system and what you implemented at Hofstra. I'm assuming you still use some of the principles in what you do now, right? But like if you wanted to expose them to, a little bit more of a strength oriented squat pattern, but maybe you come back to another squat and it's more of your rep range, hypertrophy work or speed oriented stuff. Like they get better at it. It's skill, right? So especially for those that maybe didn't play a sport and have a structured strength conditioning program, like to get good at that stuff, you got to do it more frequently.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, like the exposure to it, and you hit on it earlier, saying like, yeah, if I'm only going to have them 1 or 2 days, well, if you do total body, it doesn't matter. Like an upper lower split really doesn't work with that population. A lot of times, it can. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
people arguing in the YouTube world complaining, well, I do upper lower splits. Yes, that can obviously be done, but the amount of times that you miss 3 or 4 days out of the week because all of a sudden you got pulled in another direction and you missed your squat day for 3 weeks in a row, you're not actually executing the program at that point. Whereas if you do total,
Right.
you're still hitting those patterns, even if it's once, twice a week, even if it's a 3 day split, but you constantly are missing, let's say, the Friday. So you always are missing the Friday, but it doesn't matter because I'm still doing a push, a pull, a total body like every single day. So you can still keep moving the needle without if there is the inconsistency in your schedule. So yeah, that's why it was I love the tier system in college for different reasons. I love it even more with the tactical population because of that exact reason. Because again, life is going to throw curveballs. So at least you can stack days and stack movement patterns, even when your schedule gets out of hand. So, and just on track. So,
No question.
it's awesome. And with that, did what would you say? Like, I know you said in the tactical space, linear periodization doesn't necessarily work. Did you go more conjugate? Did you play around with a couple different things? Like, how did you base your phases?
Yeah, I think a conjugate program fits well in that population. I think what you just described in terms of the tier system, almost having like your big rocks, essentially, like if you were to have like your max effort day and your dynamic day, let's say they were only coming in two, if you had a rep effort or a little bit more of a volume based day, that is very easy to execute
Yeah,
anywhere.
yeah,
You could probably program that if, hey, listen, I can't get to the facility. I've got a med ball and I've got a weighted vest. Like you could probably get some good work done in that capacity and have that person not have to be able to maybe if they couldn't make it back into your space. I think a combination of those, even like I'm just exposing them to something like a 5-3-1 program. I know that's a little bit more linear, but you can address your big three either in the same day or in two of those days, and then kind of fill or use kind of your auxiliary stuff on a third day or something like that. So I think any of those can work. All of them really can work. When I say linear periodization, I'm thinking more lines of like, okay, you're going to have 4 to 6 weeks of a block window of time to focus on one quality, right? I think some of the other traditional periodization schemes could work as long as you know they're going to be there for, you know, at least a couple of weeks to be able to execute it.
Exactly. And you also touched on this earlier when we were still talking about football, injuries being different. Most of the time, injuries are going to be the same, like same areas of concern: lower back, knees, hips, things like that. Where when you were working the tactile space, what were some common injuries that you saw?
I think with all the running and the rucking and things like that, I think it's natural for the hips to be tight and locked, and which to me that usually means low back's probably going to be flared up a little bit. You know, those types of things, and then just like the foot and ankle stuff, like that's probably an overlooked area, I think, with athletes and probably in the tactical space as well. Just in the amount of time on feet with resistance, you got to try and do everything you can to make those areas as strong as possible. And I think there's been more stuff. We've done a ton of the Cal Dietz spring ankle stuff with our guys here. I think that would be something worth implementing in the tactical space to just strengthen the calf, the Achilles, the foot. You know, and I think just even experimenting with some barefoot type stuff, just getting the strength into the foot to be able to, you know, prepare them for that type of thing. And then I think the hip, you know, I think full range of motion training, and I'm kind of biased, this may be an old school statement. I think full range of motion training is one of the best ways to mitigate tightness and range of motion issues. Like if you could have somebody have the ankle range of motion and the hip range of motion to do a full deep squat, they probably don't have tight hips, right? That's probably helping to loosen their hips. And a little bit of resistance with full range of motion, to me, translates into actual better mobility long term. So I think just teaching full range, getting him in full range, even if that means lighting loads significantly, you know, progressing your single leg work, your split squat work, like, you know, starting them easy with maybe some step ups, exposing them to those, and then transitioning to more split squats and eventually getting to some RFE where you're doing like an increased range of motion, a split squat exercise, and you don't need a tremendous amount of load. It's going to strengthen, obviously, the entire lower extremity, but you're also going to loosen their hips. So I would say the hips, the foot and ankle, you know, and I know things have gotten, and this is 2014, so it's a long time ago now. The tests have changed, but even just the amount of push-ups and things like that, like a lot of guys just forward rounding shoulders, you know, shoulder issues, things like that, like just doing a ton of pulling. A simple formula typically is just offsetting a lot of that pushing with more horizontal and vertical pulls, TRX rows, ring rows, Penlay rows, bent over rows, chin, you know, getting them really good at chin ups, because you know they're going to do a lot of those other things anyway. So now maybe offset some of that within your program to build a strong back and strong shoulders.
100%. Yeah, 100% agree. And I like how everything you mentioned, because I feel like on social media everybody's an expert, and some of the things that get the most likes and the most shares are the most wazoo exercises. But it's like, I love when yourself, if you're posting videos of the team training, or I see like dudes in the NFL, like you're seeing NFL athletes, they're not doing any like wazoo exercise, standing on a ball, juggling. Like it's literally, what would you say your main movements, your foundational big rocks that you have in your program?
Yeah, I mean, this is a Dan John special, but like and again, like it's the push, the pull, right? Vertical, horizontal, squat, the hinge, the lunge, and the loaded carry. And for us, like I would put a TBP on there, like a total body power, whether that's, you know, Olympic based training, med ball work, you know, those types of things. So I think simple done well is always going to work. And generally speaking, like advanced training methodology, right, only probably fits 1% of the population. And I would include the professional ranks in that as well. Because like you got to remember these people.
Yeah, I was just about to say, just because they're professional athletes in their sport doesn't make them professional or high level, high training age under a barbell. That's what people don't realize.
No.
Yeah.
So you're if you're talking about a power lifter or an Olympic weightlifter who's trying to squeeze 1 to 2% out of their totals, that's a different conversation. But I have guys that walk into my room, and this has been my whole career, who are physical specimens, right? Where they're you know, their arms are, you know, 8 inches longer than their height.
Yeah.
You know, they're 220 pounds at 4% body fat. And then you watch them train, and they're not experts in that. So them actually just being great movers is going to make them better football or basketball players, right? So, and in the tactical world, it might be like, okay, this person is brilliant. They are, they're fit, they're strong. Like, how do you just give them a little bit more to be able to do their jobs better? And so, you asked about exercises, like we do Olympic variations. We clean, we squat, we snatch, we do jerks, we do things like that for total body power. We do a bunch of different squat variations. We do pulls from the floor, different depending on position, trap bar deadlifts, sumo deadlifts, things like that. Uh, we place a big emphasis on single leg work, so split squats, RFEs, things like that. I mean, then for us, and I would say from a tactical standpoint, and I know you've got a lot of strongman experience. Loaded carries, like I can't do enough of those. And if you look at the development of some of our younger guys, like when they go through our off season program, all of a sudden they have traps, they have neck, they have bigger forearms. Like I think the loaded carries are another bang for your buck movement that, and there's so much you could do with those. And then from a posterior chain standpoint, we hinge, we RDL, we do a lot of those things. And that's 90% of our strength training.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that, and there's always room for 10% of like, all right, like maybe this is a little different outside the box, but those are, maybe it's less than that. Maybe it's only 5% of what we do. So,
and I'm sure some of that 5 or 10% falls into like your injury prevention protocols and things like that. And there's certain unique exercises from that standpoint, because you get into the weeds there if you're doing like banded hip distractions, ankle distractions, things like that. But that's such a small part of the overall training pie. But I think it's important for people to hear, like, you're at a Division I university working with football and you're still doing simple movements really well. It's a simple recipe.
It is. And I think that's always going to be the case. Like that's always going to, those are the foundational principles that people long before us realize work really well. It's just now, and now you're just fine tuning and adding some things to continue to evolve it and grow it, but they work. So you don't need to deviate from them. And I think that's the hard part sometimes, is that you need to like look at your population and see what they need at a given time. And that's where the creativity comes from. But the research will continue to tell you, like, you're stronger, you're going to be more prepared. So, and what gets you stronger? Simple, basic compound movements with a barbell or dumbbell.
Funny, I'm sure same way. The longer I do this, the simpler I become. Like when I was new into strength and conditioning, I wanted to do every bell and whistle, everything I read, everything I learned about, I wanted to do in a program. And you almost get writer's block. You're just like, there's so much stuff out there. And then just the longer you do it, the simpler you get, because you know the simple things always will work. A barbell is undefeated. So
undefeated, 100%.
But no, that's awesome, George. So as far as I know, you touched on the loaded carries. What type of stuff do you do for loaded carries? Obviously, farmers walks, I assume. You do anything else?
Yep. So we do traditional farmers walks, suitcase carries. People call them waiter walks, right? Like the single arm overhead. We do Zercher carries in the summer, like on the field. We'll include those. Really like we'll attach bands to kettlebells, or just to me they're a staple. They've been honestly, my boss at Fort Bragg, Michael Hall, did a ton of loaded carries with his guys, and that was the first time I really had been exposed to like people doing that as a staple and like progressing them. So since then I took it from there, and I've used it everywhere else I've been as a mainstay in our programming. And there's so much variety. You can do so many different things with it. In our weight room, we have it's probably about 20 yards of open space. So we just build up with load or changing implement or make adjustments that way. But it's a staple in our program.
Switching gears a little bit. So one thing I love about the tactical profession is not what the tactical professionals are going to think makes sense, because everybody doesn't like taking PT tests, but coming from the college athletics world, and every university around the country is doing a different, not PT test, but conditioning test or something like that. Now, for you guys, if you're allowed to say, I don't know if you're keeping that close to the chest, but what do you do from a conditioning test standpoint?
We don't do a conditioning test.
Beautiful. Perfect.
So, for us, like we have access to these guys. To me, the conditioning tests really started. I think they really started when guys were going home for real extended periods of time, and coaches wanted to assess what they were walking into when a guy was coming back. Um, it, for us to do a conditioning test in January, where our emphasis is going to be on strength, power, building hypertrophy, like we're assessing something that we're not necessarily going to be chasing anyway. So like we'll assess where they are with like a rep out on squat and bench just to get an idea. Like we'll put them at 70% and do a rep out and 75%, see where they are. We'll give them a target, we'll give them a cap. Okay, we know this guy is here, we know this guy is there. We'll have mid-year transfers, we'll do that. And then we'll build them up over time, right? But I think, it's in our world and in basketball, in football and basketball, like those guys never leave campus really, especially you're training them for such a long period of time. You're assessing every day.
That's what I was going to say.
And the biggest assessment for us is like, we have them all summer. We're going to know where they are. We're going to hit certain yardage targets with the GPS units that get us prepared for camp. That's probably going to tell us enough about what we need to know. And then the biggest test and assessment you can ever have is playing the sport, right? And then we'll make adjustments from that based on our coaches, their feedback. If we have a guy that looks significantly behind compared to other guys for whatever reason, typically we would be ahead of that and be able to make some adjustments if necessary with some additional work or things like that. But we don't do a traditional conditioning test.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. The reason I bring that up is because I do like the fact that across the board, the PT tests are the same. So then you compare everybody. There's actual data driving it, and you can see where you rack and stack, and you can see where you need to put more of your efforts. Like if you go into pick any, I'm sure even in your conference, like everybody's doing different testing protocols, maybe they're doing conditioning tests, maybe they're not doing a conditioning test. So that's one thing I've liked about the tactical population is that it's consistent and what you're trying.
Yeah, it's uniform. Yeah.
Yeah, it's uniform. So
that makes sense.
For the people that are actually having to do it, the tactical professionals, they probably don't love doing the PT test and why are we doing this?
No doubt.
It is nice from a strength and conditioning perspective because then you know where you're lacking. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that because that was one thing that was refreshing is seeing that like, oh, we have the same conditioning test for everybody, same PT test for everybody. So it's good. Awesome, man. Well, cool, man. Well, I could go all day with you, but I know you're in season and you got stuff to do and stuff like that. But I truly appreciate it, George, for you hopping on here. It's always great talking shop. Again, this was long overdue anyway, so it was great to talk it up and talk programming because we're talking about life stuff and family stuff.
No question.
This was awesome, man. If anybody wants to find you on social media, are you comfortable sharing your socials if people want to reach out?
Yeah, 100%. Yep. So I just at Greene Strength, E at the end of Greene Strength, and feel free to reach out if anybody has any questions or needs anything.
Awesome, brother. I really appreciate it, and good luck the rest of the season. And we'll talk soon, brother. All right.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you.